Hi everyone, welcome back to The Mystic in the Woods. I'm Kate, and today we are going to be doing some of my standout decks, books, and other witchy things from 2024. So this video was actually a little bit harder for me to plan this year because I really just haven't brought as many decks into my collection as normal or as much stuff into my practice as I have in previous years. So I just don't have as many physical things, especially that I haven't already spoken about on the channel. So I really especially struggled with the standout decks from 2024 because I've already spoken about all of these fairly in depth numerous times on the channel. And so I'm not even sure if I'm going to do a top or most used decks of 2024 because I feel like they would just be the same. But you guys can let me know, in the comments below if that's something you're interested in anyway. But let's start with decks. Let's go ahead and just start with those and then move on. Now, this is what I mean, I've already talked about, I have 3 decks. I narrowed it down to 3 decks because while I'm very, very happy with all of the decks that came into my collection this year, and I've already talked about them, there are these 3 decks that really just stand out to me as they were surprisingly good. I used them more than I thought. They were more powerful than I thought. Anyway, first one is the Archetypes Oracle by Kim Kranz. And I have a whole review of this deck on the channel, which you can go back and watch, where I am brutally honest about all the things that I love and hate about this deck. This was a deck that I really didn't want to love. I put off buying this deck for a while. And when I finally did, I'm just so glad that I have it in my collection now. I recently was doing some traveling and I really was determined to only bring 2 decks. 2 decks, 1 tarot, 1 oracle. And this was the oracle deck that I landed on because while I can't yet use this deck as, say, a clarifier in a reading without turning to the guidebook, I do really love it I use this for my professional work when I'm creating programs and sales pages and content and all that type of stuff. I use this when I am reading for myself, and so therefore I can reference the guidebook as needed. And while I was traveling, I was with some friends, and so I did a handful of tarot readings for them. And I decided to go ahead and use this deck, even though it's still not one that I, like I said, feel comfortable necessarily using without the guidebook. And I was really surprised because I was reading for friends. I felt totally comfortable reaching for the guidebook and refreshing myself on a card meaning and it was good practice basically using this deck. And I was actually really shocked. This was the first time I've used this deck in that setting, at how well it clarifies, how well it will clarify the overall spread, how well it will clarify an individual card, how well it will just bring a voice to the reading, like an overarching theme, or I can read it just as a part of the general spread. So when I read with multiple decks, which I always do because that's just my style, usually I use Oracle as a part of, it's kind of part tarot, part Oracle for the meat of the reading, and then I also clarify with Oracle. And I was absolutely shocked at how well this deck did. I'm actually seriously considering getting the pocket edition so that I can have it more readily for traveling because, of course, this took up, a good amount of real estate in a carry-on that I was trying to bring only the carry-on for this trip. So that deck, I think I'm going to get the smaller copy of it. Absolutely floored. Go watch the review. The only thing that has changed since the review is the fact that I do now use it, if I can reference the guidebook. I have used it, I should say, reading for others and reading as a part of a whole spread for other people, and it works beautifully for that as well. It's like there's nothing that deck can't do. So go ahead and watch the review. Now, the other deck that I'm absolutely floored by is the Circle of Doors Tarot. I have an unboxing of this on the channel. I spoke about this, I think, in my last video I think all 3 of these decks were on my workhorse video list. Here's the backing. This was sent to me by the creators. Thank you so much for sending me this deck. It has very quickly climbed the ranks in my collection and become an absolutely core deck in my work, in my personal life, in my personal practice, in my work as a priestess. This deck channels the sacred feminine in a way that almost nothing else in my deck does. And when we say that, you know, of course you can use any deck to connect with any energy. The other deck I traveled with this time around was my Ember and Aura Tarot, which I've spoken about on the channel before. This is a very divine feminine deck. This is very pink. It's very Christ consciousness. It's very Mary Magdalene. And while I was traveling, I used this deck to communicate with Goetic Infernals. Aesthetically doesn't match. Not a great, not the deck I would choose for that. But it worked. And my point is, you don't need a specific deck to channel the sacred feminine or the goddess or anything. But I will say that this deck does channel the sacred feminine beautifully, clearly, with emotion. This deck has absolutely positively climbed the ranks of my practice, of my work with others, and in my work as a priestess. I use this deck all the time, constantly, for everything. Absolutely love it. I am considering buying a second copy because I don't know what I would do if this deck was out of print, such as my Ember and Aura Tarot, which is out of print, and I'm really, really glad that I have a backup copy of that deck. So I'm considering purchasing a backup copy of this deck. I love it so much. So that is the Circle of Doors Tarot. The third deck, again, I think none of you will be surprised. This is the Witch Sisters Tarot by, is it Julia? Yeah, Julia Jeffries. There's the guidebook. Phenomenal. Here is the backing. This deck I have already spoken about lots on the channel. You guys are probably sick of me talking about this deck, but this deck has really, really just shocked me. I have just been absolutely shocked, floored, in awe of this deck. The artwork, the guidebook, the way that this deck reads, the way it connects me to Morgan Le Fay, the way that it connects me to my path as a sort of wild woman priestess type. I've talked about it before, like this deck has changed the way I view myself. It has changed the way I view my spiritual practice, the way that I view my work as a priestess, the offerings that I have put out into the world and have coming out soon. This deck absolutely shifted and helped to mold the course of my life this year. And so this is another deck, I think I said this before, I'm going to be buying a backup copy of, and I think I'm going to pull just the majors out so I can use it as a majors only deck when I want to. I will also just say about this deck, I don't even really attempt to read this in a Rider-Waite-Smith way. I just kind of let that system come in and out as needed in the reading, and I mostly just focus on how she writes about this deck in the guidebook. So for example, like the Circle of Doors Tarot, you can read this with straight Rider-Waite-Smith meanings, and that's going to work. It's going to be beautiful. The guidebook has some lovely, lovely snippets in it. I absolutely recommend the guidebook. But you can read this one as a Rider-Waite-Smith. This one, you probably can. I just don't. I just read this as its own sort of system. And I love that deck. Okay, so those were kind of my three standout decks. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do one more. Because I'm just like looking at my pile of contenders here, and I'm gonna do one more. This is the European Goddesses Spirits. The European Goddesses and Spirits Oracle deck. And I did an unboxing of this one on my channel because Joanna, the creator, sent me a copy to unbox and to talk about on the channel ahead of the Kickstarter. And then I loved it so much, and the Kickstarter kept reaching all its stretch goals, like the gilded edging and the beautiful matte cardstock and the extra like good box and all the things. So I purchased a copy because I wanted the cardstock and the edging. For me, working with tarot, one of the reasons that I love it, or working with cards in general, because of course this is an oracle deck, is that while it does help me to, of course, connect with my spiritual path, connect with my deities and my guides, and kind of all this stuff that's like out there, it also, there's a tactile, embodied experience working with the cards, the way they feel in my hand, the way that I shuffle them, the way that I, lay them out on the table. This is all a part of the experience for me. And so while, a card on subpar cardstock, like this one, unfortunately, can still be a great deck that clearly climbs the ranks of my collection, given the option, I'm going to go with the one that offers the extra tactile experience. So, anyway, let me show you some imagery of this one. Literally the only single complaint that I have about this deck is that I really, 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 really wish that it had a keyword on the card. I really do wish that the card itself didn't just have the deity or the goddess or the spirit's name, but also had a keyword. So that's kind of like my only, in quotes, complaint, okay? But it's still a deck I absolutely love. The guidebook is phenomenal. The messages are phenomenal. If you purchase this deck, the larger book right here, the larger book is absolutely, in my opinion, worth it because it has just lots of extras in it. But even the little white book that comes with the deck is absolutely phenomenal. I find that this deck offers really clear messages, really brings an energy into the reading, and really does help you connect with the European goddesses and spirits, the European pantheons, the European traditions. If you've been around this channel a while, my feelings on this, that personally, for me, it has been very important to reconnect to the spiritual practices of pre-Christian Northern Europe. And this deck is absolutely a great tool in that. Because it really does help to bring in those spirits and goddesses and stories and myths and archetypes, and the messages in the guidebook that accompany that are just fantastic as well. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the fourth. I'm going to throw another one in here. I'm just going to do this deck as well, because while this is probably not on my most used deck list of the year, it is definitely on my standout deck list. And as I get to know it more and more, I'm using it more and more as well. So I really love that one too. Okay, let's do witchy stuff next. And then we'll do books last. So I don't have very many things in this category, okay? Because again, I didn't buy that much this year. I really tried to not, actually. So while I purchased like candles and I repurchased incense and those kinds of things, I didn't actually buy new stuff very much. So I will, of course, quickly shout out the place that I always buy most of my witchy stuff from, and that is Sacred Soleil. This is, for example, one of her oils, which is very much oily and gross now. That's because I did that, not because it came in perfect condition when she sent it to me. But I buy all my incense from her. I buy my oils from her. Actually, Alexandra is going to be the co-host for season 1 of the Reclamation Hour podcast, which I will have more details on soon. I'm very, very excited to be launching the podcast, but Alexandra, who owns that shop, is going to be season 1's co-host, so that's exciting. So I did repurchase incense from her, and I repurchased oils from her. She's also the astrologer that I recommend. And we'll just a little shout out to Alexandra. I'm not a huge incense person in general, okay? I don't love a lot of smoke. Most incense just smells like burning charcoal to me. I just don't love it. I do use it as an offerings for specific deities, especially in a window that I can crack, so the majority of the smoke just goes out. But I do really like Alexandra's incense. So that's the only incense that I burn. Now, here's the thing about incense, though. I got an ad for this, okay? This is like a loose incense burner, okay? And this one is from Soul Space. This is their botanical incense collection. I did go ahead and for one time I purchased the sample packages of all of their loose incense, even though a lot of it does have white sage in it, which I'm not actually a huge fan of, so I don't know if I will be repurchasing. That's a whole separate topic. But basically you just put the loose incense on this, right? Spread it out. Tea light candle, light it up, and there you go. Incense, and you get the smoke. Now, what I have been doing, what I actually have in here right now, is loose cedar. I burn a lot of cedar, a lot of mugwort. And what I have found, this is why I purchased this, is that you can burn any loose incense you want on here. Okay? So I can put my own loose incense on here and have a temporary burn in smoke. I will say that it does not burn as long when I use my own incense blends. It does not burn as long, and I do have to be careful because eventually it starts to actually burn this. And there's instructions, like they tell you to really keep the wick burnt, like trimmed down, and not to use beeswax because it burns at a higher temperature, and these kinds of things. So the product comes with excellent instructions and tips for using it appropriately. So some of this could be user error, but it gives me that temporary burst of smoke to cleanse things like a tarot deck, to use as an offering, to do whatever it is that I'm trying to do with my sacred smoke without the burning charcoal, because I really dislike, and again, this could be user error, I have not been happy ever burning a charcoal disc and then putting loose herbs on top. It's just never worked for me. There's always too much smoke, or there's this or there's that. It's not a good inside thing for me to do, okay, using those charcoal discs. This is working out perfectly for my needs. I love it. So glad I bought it. And I will continue to burn my loose herbs on it that I mostly buy from Alexandra at Sacred Soleil. I will put her link below. On that, including like mugwort and cedar are the two I've burned the most so far. And I've really, really liked using it. Now, the second thing is that I got at a Renaissance fair, and it is this. Look at this. I got this at a Renaissance festival in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And it has a dragon on it. It feels very Celtic-y. And it has this great holder for my smoke sticks. So this is absolutely one of my standout witchy items. I've seen these before on the internet, similar versions of this, like altar trays and stuff. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. Absolutely love this, being able to burn my stick and then just drop it in there. I know there's like lots of things you can use to put your smoke bundles in when they're burning, right? But this has worked out great for me. Absolutely love it. Can't recommend it enough. Of course, you're not going to probably be able to get this one unless you go to the Renaissance Festival in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. But I've seen versions of this all around on the internet, and I'm so happy. And it can act as like a little altar and just love it. So in love with it. Okay. So anyway, that's really the only like witchy stuff I have to share with you guys this year. Shockingly enough. Okay. All right, so on to the books. So we have just a few books to talk about as really standout decks. I read a lot this year, and these are kind of the three that really stand out to me as the three books I read this year that I highly, highly recommend. So this is the first one, When God Was a Woman. And When God Was a Woman is like basically required reading for like the sacred feminine space. It's been around for a while. You've probably read it if you've been in this community for a bit. I hadn't. And I absolutely love this book as just an overview of the goddess in, it says on the back, like the Near and Middle East. I have really, really enjoyed this book. A lot of the stuff I already knew from my other study, but a lot of it was new. I love the way that they explain stuff. I love the way that they pulled it all together. Cannot recommend this book enough if the sacred feminine is of interest to you and, goddess worship in general is of interest to you. So then I have two more books. So the first one is this one. This is God's Monsters. And this is an excellent book about the sort of, I should have looked up how they actually like describe this book. But this is about the sort of monsters in the Bible. I'm looking at because I only have the ebook version, I'm just looking at the table of contents here. So, of course, we talk about, part 1, God's entourage, the seraphim, the cherubim, the adversary, the destroyer and other angels, demons and God's ranks, manipulative and mind-altering spirits. Then we go to the monsters beneath, and we have sea monsters and ghosts and giants, and then we have the God monster, the monster of monsters, the wonder of wonders. This is an excellent, easily approachable and digestible book on kind of, the devil and demons and all those different, in quotes, monsters that are in the Bible. So the full title is God's Monsters, Vengeful Spirits, Deadly Angels, Hybrid Creatures, and Divine Hitmen of the Bible. So this is a very, very good book if that is stuff that is of interest to you and that is stuff that you want to be learning more about, especially from a historical perspective and from a scholarly perspective, but in a way that is more digestible than, say, something written specifically for other scholars, which is something I've talked about before on the channel. Okay, so then the third book that I wanted to share here is The Cauldron and the Drum, A Journey into Celtic Shamanism by Rhonda McCrimmon, and I don't know for sure that I said her name right. I am only 2/3 through this book, so I haven't actually finished it. But so far, I really, really recommend this book if you are wanting an introduction into this sort of Celtic shamanism approach and spiritual practice. She does a really good job of outlining some practices that you can do, sort of some theory and philosophy and her practices and stuff like that. This is a really, really good beginner-friendly book into Celtic shamanism, which is, an aspect of what I will call shamanic practice that I engage in, even though, shaman is that there's a whole history with that word that can be quite problematic. But within the English language, it's the one that we have to describe really earth-based, animistic types of practices. And I do think that this book is a really, really good introduction into sort of this idea of Celtic shamanism. So I highly recommend this book if that is something that is of interest to you, and it's definitely on my standout book list of the year. Because, like I said, I've really read a lot of books here this year, and these are kind of the 3 that floated to the top as I was thinking, which ones really, really stand out to me that I really recommend moving forward. And it's definitely kind of these 3, even though I've read a lot of books on Satan and the devil and biblical scholarship, especially this year, and Avalon this year, and kind of a variety of different topics. But these are the books that have stood out to me. So if you have any questions, if there's anything you want me to talk about more, if you do want a most used deck list of the year, even though I have talked about every deck that would be on that list, go ahead and let me know in the comments before. And yeah, the Reclamation Hour podcast will be coming out shortly, and details for that will be released soon as well. So I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.